All right.
There we go. Thank you. All right. So the reading I gave you and what I asked you to focus on was, first of all, Parmenides, because I noticed last time that there was some hesitations or kind of stumbling over this Parmenidean problem that Aristotle's wrangling with. And, and reading Aristotle kind of heightened my own awareness of how important Parmenides was as a interlocutor. I mean, Plato spent half of his dialogues, engaging and trying to overcome Parmenides, and Aristotle starts all of his treatises by dealing with Parmenides. There's no progress in any thought or any science unless you've wrestled and pinned Parmenides down to the ground. Right? And we make fun of Zeno's paradoxes, but we don't really take them very seriously. So that might not be very good for our thought. Maybe the Greek thought reached its titanic summit precisely because it took Parmenides really, really seriously. And that's kind of one of the things I want to broach. We don't want to talk about Parmenides, and then I want to kind of look at Aristotle's solution to the problem of motion that Parmenides posed. Because I think it is exemplary philosophical method. And so understanding, yes, it's exemplary philosophical method. One of the things that I think a lot of people have a trouble with in philosophy is they ask, well, where did these concepts come from? Aristotle has this definition of change, and Plato has this definition of form, and other people are talking about potency and reality, and I think people are largely at a loss as to where the concepts even come from. And it's not like you can pick them up off the street and say, okay, well, I'm gonna advocate for this concept of change that I found on the street. And or then people, from the 19th century on, they wanted to historicize metaphysics, and so they wanted to attribute all metaphysical concepts to the time and the place and the kind of people that invented or created metaphysics. And so we hear, that it's Greeks, the Greeks thought this way, and maybe the Persians didn't, but the Greeks, we just happened to be descended from the Greeks, and so we just happen to have some of these concepts that the Greeks gave us, but really they're just expressing some of the preferences and the ideologies of Athens. So these kind of theories crop up because people are generally not very familiar with the nature of a fundamental concept, a non-derivable concept, and what the method is for even arriving at this kind of concept. And so I want to kind of look at what Aristotle has to say about change from that perspective, to see what the method is. What the method is to get at a first philosophical concept like the concept of change. Okay, but before we do that, we need to grapple a little bit with Parmenides, and so I would like to start off. Yes, Peter. First the method, then the madness. Exactly. Let's start off with on 8. Is somebody going to share a screen? I don't have the text to share. I only have my goofy little diagrams. Oh, thanks, Peter. So let's just, before we look at Aristotle's answer, which we did fairly extensively last time, we're going to look at what he has to say about how Parmenides approached the problem, and then how Aristotle deals with it. So that would be page 16, or the beginning of book 1, chapter 8. Awesome, thank you. All right, so just to save time, I'll do the initial reading, but hopefully others will chime in and do some of the reading later on. Okay. We shall next argue that this is also the only way to resolve the puzzle of the ancient thinkers. For those who were the first to inquire philosophically into the truth and the nature of beings were turned aside and, as it were, diverted from their route by their inexperience, and say that none of the beings either comes to be or passes away, because what comes to be must come to be either from what is or from what is not, both of which are impossible. For what is cannot come to be, since it already is. Well, from what is not, nothing can come to be. For there must be some underlying subject for it to come from. And so, developing the consequences of this, they went on to say that there is no plurality of things, but only being itself. All right. So, I see Garth's hand. Yeah, but I would like to hear your understanding of this basic argument, and I want to draw out what makes it very compelling. And yeah, so let's do that. So if you have a take on this, why is it impossible for something to come to be on these Parmenidean on this Parmenidean basis? So Garth, you're the first one. Go ahead.
I actually wanted to ask why something can't come from nothing. Is this really discussed here, or?
No.
I mean, I can understand why it wouldn't be classified as motion, because in order for, or as change, because that is what you need the underlying subject for.
Uh-huh.
But is Aristotle sort of implicitly assuming that all coming to be is change then?
I think so. I mean, what do you mean implicitly assuming? You mean
or maybe defining?
He's actually referencing Parmenides,
changes,
right?
This coming to be or passing away might be a better way for me to put it.
Right. So, I mean, I guess the question is what would an account look like if we said any change comes from nothing? So,
like the Big Bang.
well, yeah, but I mean, it's like, why did Michael say one word and then the other? Well, because nothing. Why did Michael drink water? Well, because nothing. And so why is the sun rise? Well, because nothing. So so the problem is that nothing doesn't have any content that would allow us to understand why something comes to be from nothing. And so what this does is, you might say, oh, well, maybe things just come from nothing. But what you've done is made it impossible to comprehend why anything happens. Because the only answer will be, well, nothing spurted it out. And because nothing doesn't have any content, we can't say, well, nothing, does X, Y, and Z at time T, or something like that, right? We can't give any kind of explanatory, account. It actually destroys the logos, any possibility of comprehending anything, right? So that is why this alternative is rejected out of hand. It's a pseudo explanation. It's the same kind of pseudo explanation as God did it, or God decided that's and just always for everything. Why did you get up at 8 rather than 7? Well, God decided, or nothing happened, and that's why I got up at 8. Yeah.
I think there's a sort of a gap here between possibility and actuality. Like, it seems, I mean, when I read this, because we were looking at the word impossible,
Yep.
Maybe nothing can be a potentiality for something coming to be, but something else must be present in order to make it actual.
Yeah.
in which case something can come from nothing, but there can still be an explanation.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, no, that's going towards what Aristotle is, Aristotle's solution, right? And Richard's got an excellent point in the chat. In what sense is that even nothing? And Aristotle uses this term lack to give us a terminological handhold that we're not talking about this sheer nothingness that Parmenides defines as that which is not. And therefore, since it is not, it cannot be the cause of anything coming to be. And it can't be the ground it can't be the starting point through which we understand anything's nature.
So this way of thinking of nothing also excludes potentials or capacities.
Yes, you might say it's too heavy-handed, and Aristotle, like as we learned in our Schmidt group, Aristotle the kind of introduces distinctions, lots of distinctions, some of which are infuriating. But yes, so we're going to start whittling away through discriminations at this massive thesis about being. So yes, and so we're going to distinguish then between nothing and lack in order to get at Aristotle's account. But I got a couple hands, so let's hit them. Sandy and then Ed.
Oh, I thought I was muted the whole time, but I wasn't. Okay. Hopefully there weren't any weird noises coming from my end.
No, not at all.
I just was confused about where the nothingness was coming from. Is that a concept or an anti-concept that Parmenides was introducing here? Or is that just kind of a name that was given to this, like you were saying earlier about the God made me do it? Was it just kind of a name that was assigned to this kind of a random dead end thing that I mean, it just seems a bit weird. I'm just confused about where it came from.
Excellent. Yeah, a good question. And I mean, I'm going to, if we have any Parmenides experts here, please chime in. Does anybody have a handy answer to Sandy? I've got a handy answer too, but I just want to hear if anybody else has any thoughts on that, right? It has to do with Parmenides' thesis that only being is. Ed, go for it.
And again, the way you're asking the question, this is kind of running to the end of what Parmenides is saying.
Right.
So in a way, it might be cheating, but it does seem that he kind of sees being as a complete package, and right. that being has to be being 100%, and being has to be necessarily, and because being has to be 100%, the only other option is nothing whatsoever at all.
Right.
And that's kind of the way his logic is working. You've got two boxes, and you really only have one box. I mean, the other is just like a placeholder. It does nothing, It's this approach we're saying being is being 100%. It's completely being, and there's no degrees to being. That's what seems to me to be the engine that gets Parmenides running.
Yes, I agree. Sandy, do you want to respond to that, or does it? If not, then maybe there's another voice or two that wants to approach the question.
So where does the nothing come from then? If he's all leaning on the side of being, that's what I'm just confused about. Right. Is he just using it like a straw man because he needs to have an opposite that to attack in order to make his argument sound legit? Like I don't really understand where, like, how it's coming into play.
Right.
Yeah.
So, so we have to think Parmenidean being now. That's our first task, right? And so, and I was just kind of thinking about this, and maybe this works, maybe it doesn't, right? But what you have to do is you have to think everything. Right? Just think everything, and think about everything, both in terms of everything past and everything future and everything now, and everything far away and everything close and everything big and everything small, and think that all as one, right? That, all of that. We're not thinking about individual things in space and something like that. We're just thinking the totality of all that is, and we're thinking of that as a snapshot, all that is, all that was, all that ever will be, and we're just thinking that totality, right? That totality is what everything that you would want to point to, in all the individual things, what they all have in common is their being, right? And so maybe we can terminologically just call this isness. I think that's one translation of Parmenides in being, right? Isness, this totality as totality never changes. It's always the same totality. And since it is all being, there is literally nothing that can limit it. So it's unlimited. So here we get the concept of nothing coming in, right? Nothing can limit it. So it is unlimited. It is infinite. There is no gap. There is no lack. There is nothing missing, because it's isness, that which everything shares in order to be it all. That block totality is what we're thinking here, right? And it is not somewhere, because if it were somewhere, there would have to be somewhere else that it is not. But since it is all being, it has encompassed the totality of all possible places where, all possible times. And just this being, just thinking that in its total abstraction from this thing being and that thing being, right? And thinking that is what they all have in common. And that is isness itself. That's being itself. And there is, and within this totality, there's nothing but being. I think people today call it like a pleroma, right? Just this sheer fullness, this absolute bottomless, pure being. Everything just reveals more being. It's as extensively and intensively just pure being. That is what Parmenides is talking about. That. And there can be no nothingness. There can be no non-being in this totality. Within isness, there is no lack of isness. There is no lack. That's why it's full. That's why it's total. That's why it's infinite. That's why it's, he says there's no beginning, middle, or end. And that's why he compares it to a circle, right? Because there's no point on a circle that is its proper starting point or ending point, right? So he calls it a sphere where everything that is contained in it. But we can't think of it as spatial sphere, because that would put it surround it with nothingness, right? And nothingness isn't. So being can't be surrounded by nothingness, because that would imply that nothingness is. But Parmenides says, yeah, but nothingness is not. So in this totality of being, how is change possible? Right? This totality of being would either have to come from nothing, in which case we're attributing nothingness a kind of being, but then we're just extending being into its own origin, because now nothingness is being. So now that origin somehow is, and now it's been drawn inside of being rather than being outside of being. So being has to be understood as its own origin. It has to come from itself. It is eternal, timeless. Right? All these predicates belong to being just once you begin thinking of it as this totality of isness. I see a couple of hands. Sorry, who was first? Clark, then Sandy, and then Garth.
Yeah, hey there.
Hey,
Can you hear me?
Yes, you're breaking up a little bit, but
I'm driving.
okay.
Okay. Yeah. So beautiful soliloquy there, Michael. Really enjoyed that. You painted a very fleshy, kind of organic picture of the mindset of Parmenides. I liked it. Thanks. Yeah, and you already brought it up. I mean, I was just saying the simple way that and believe me, as you all know, I'm no expert on any of this, but I had been reading just today in preparation a little bit about Parmenides. And the easiest way I understand it is, he said basically change is an illusion for all the reasons you said.
Right.
You can't have something becoming from nothing, because nothing cannot be. You know, it's kind of that simple and that complex.
Exactly.
So change is an illusion, and if all change is an illusion, then everything is one.
Yes.
You know, so that's the way I put it together.
That's beautiful.
Helps.
No, thank you so much, Clark. I think that helps a lot. Sandy.
So I keep running into the same problem when I'm encountering him talking about this, because it's just not clear to me. So is he agreeing with this or disagreeing with it? Why is he talking about it again? And because when I try to think about what he's saying, it seems to be the same thing, but then it's like he's saying that in other places it's not. It just it's always really confusing to me. Like, can you just please like cheat and tell me, just come out and say it?
Say what his solution is?
No, say what, why is he so hung up on this? It's because he thinks it's a good idea, it's a bad idea, it's right, it's wrong, it's a mixed bag.
Right.
Yeah, that's just because at first I'm like, okay, because again, like when you start talking about it that way, I'm like, wait a minute, that's not Aristotle, that's Parmenides.
Right.
Okay, that's already like a whole lot just for my brain to take in, and then I have to expand it to get what Aristotle's opinion of this is, which is still unclear to me, I guess, at this point.
Okay, yeah.
And it still keeps running together. I don't know, like the idea that there is no change, but then everything is changed, kind of seems like it's the same idea, which obviously shows that I don't understand.
No, I mean, I think they're intimately related. So I think you understand more than you're giving yourself credit for. But I'm still not. Does anybody want to try to answer Sandy? Did anybody have a thought in their head like maybe this would help?
Well, Aristotle thinks Parmenides is wrong.
Pardon me?
Right. Aristotle thinks Parmenides is wrong.
Exactly.
He thinks Parmenides got painted himself into a corner with some flawed assumptions.
Excellent. Yes. Okay. So that's the first and perhaps most important thing. Let me see.
Aristotle thinks that the underlying subject is part of the key to solving this thing, and that Parmenides missed that part.
Exactly.
Now, there are different kinds of subjects. And because you got to remember, if we accept Parmenides, we accept there is no change, none,
right.
Zero, zilch.
Well, or at least it's illusory, right? I mean, I think that, yeah.
And I have to say, Michael, I really enjoyed your soliloquy as well. It really makes me realize that I think Parmenides his definition of what is seems to be a definition of the infinite.
Yes, and the one. Well, it's really a definition of everything, and that's part of the problem.
So I know
everything at once.
I remember when we started doing Parmenides, it was like several years ago in Hollywood District. I remember, anyways, and I'm so happy to actually be able to really honor Parmenides because it is a landmark in Western philosophy.
No, yes, I think that's true. It's a strange thought, but the point is that Parmenides argued it in a way it has its limpid simplicity. Being is and not being is not, right? And I don't think that that had been made clear in its logical completeness before. It's available in Orphic religions, and it was available in mythologies and theories of chaos that preceded Parmenides, but in just this logical disjunctive totality. It It was shocking because, yeah, I mean, if being is, then all of that follows. including that there's no change, and so it seems like he's got us boxed in. Well, in order for us to grant ontological dignity to change and say, well, it's not just illusion, it's real.
Well, Ed has his hand up, it looks like.
Oh yeah, okay, sorry, yeah. Let me finish the sentence. So in order for us to grant change, ontological dignity to change, we're going to have to say that it's not the case that being is. And now it seems like the floodgates of stupidity and contradiction and absolute arbitrariness have been opened up, because now it seems like everything that is at the same time is not. And in the same respect, everything becomes a contradiction. Everything is being and not being. So if I say, is there some ham in the fridge? And somebody says, yes, that also means no. Right? And so, okay, so language ceases to work. So anyway, yeah, thanks. Bo pointed out Ed, and then Sandy and Garth's been very patient. So I'm actually going to go Ed.
Wait.
No, Garth.
I was supposed to be next.
Yeah, I apologize. Garth, you're at the top. I just opened my little participants thing. Yeah.
Okay. I wanted to say that I think maybe some of our difficulty in understanding this comes from the superficial way we treat knowledge. Like, maybe it's since Descartes, or maybe it's even a more modern thing than that, but knowing has become like an object for us. We just think of knowing as just like a brain process. We don't really capture our own subjectivity in any anymore. And I think reading Aristotle requires us to overcome that and recognize that what Aristotle is doing is going through like the history of thinking about something, so that you can grasp the meaning of his argument. If you don't have that history, there's no way to get a purchase on why he's saying what he's saying, or to interpret his words the way that he intends them. That's sort of to answer Sandy's
Beautiful.
question.
No.
I don't know if that helps at all.
It's music to my ears, but I think it's a very essential
okay,
point.
So I was thinking about this today because I was reading Hegel. And the very first sentence of the sense certainty chapter is, he says, knowing which is our object. So I think he's doing a play on words there, but he's basically saying that we've reduced knowing to an object. And that's already something that's manifestly false.
Okay.
Anyway,
I appreciate that.
So, but I wanted to say that I think in the sentence, nothing comes from nothing. The word nothing is being used homonymously. There's two meanings of the word nothing in that sentence.
Good.
And in the discussion of nothing, we are making this mistake because the first nothing in the sentence is an exclusion of everything. Nothing comes from nothing. Nothing, meaning there isn't anything. But then the last nothing in that sentence is like a determinate nothing. It's a nothing that has this property, which is nothing comes from it. And that's, I think, a manifest contradiction. So I can't accept that sentence because it is self-contradictory.
Well, on that reading, it would be correct. But would you at least acknowledge that if you held the sense of nothing constant over those two appearances of the letters, that the sentence is not self-refuting?
I'm just not able to mentally do that yet. So.
Okay, well, I think that's a very interesting point that I personally can't pursue, but because that gets us to a level of textual analysis that I'm not ready to engage with. But for whatever reason, and maybe a bad one, it made a lot of sense to Aristotle, and it made him use a lot of ingenuity to to deal with it. And it's funny enough because he basically bequeathed to philosophy this distinguishing senses of words and paying attention to the sense that you're trying to think about logically. So he did have that technique available to him to parse nothing. So he chose not to use it. So yeah, okay, I'm done rambling. Let me see, who's next? Ed.
Your sort of initial question was, does anyone want to take a stab at
Yeah.
what Aristotle's getting at here? So I thought I would say just a little bit about that. And
Beautiful.
clearly, and I think other people have mentioned this too, clearly he thinks that Parmenides was mistaken. But the other thing about Aristotle is that he's very generous, and he's saying Parmenides got it wrong, but he's not an idiot. There's a reason he got it wrong, and it makes sense that he got it wrong. So that's something I think we need to see what Aristotle's doing. He's rejecting it, but not blaming
Yes.
Parmenides for it. And the exception of the Megarians, he tends to give people some credit.
Right.
One little question, if you don't mind,
Sure.
one of the things that in Parmenides that I find irritating, and you touched on this a bit, was this image of the sphere.
Right.
And likewise, the idea that being is limited. You've been saying it's unlimited, but if I remember correctly, Parmenides says that being is limited. And the idea of the limit and the idea of a sphere in space,
Right.
that image at least, both of those suggest that you brought up the problem. The problem is that a limit implies an outside edge of the limit, which would then say there's something on the other side. So just bringing up that little quibble maybe, but maybe you're trying to get at something by saying unlimited, and I will now be quiet.
No, that's excellent. And I don't have a handy dandy answer for you. I just have to look at the text. So unlimited or infinite can either mean completely indeterminate, or it can mean having a limit. And if it has a limit, then it either is limited by another, and that cannot be the case, because it would be, so in order for it to be limited by another, it would have to be that other. So it's self-limited. And the Greek use of unlimited is having no limit, and therefore not being anything in particular, being completely indeterminate. Right. And so things that are self-limited are infinite because they are their own limit. Right? And so that's the concept I was using to explicate this whole idea that nothing limits it. It's only limited by nothing, but that's not to be limited at all, because nothing is not. All right. So this is like a little pretzel logic. So I hope that helps. That whole idea that in order to be, it must be something. In order to be something, it must be limited. In order for being to be limited, it must be its own limit. And so it closes in on itself, and that's where you get the sphere image. So we shouldn't take the sphere image too literally, but literally this idea of closing in on itself and thereby containing itself. That's where we get this. That's how I understand the sphere. Because the alternative is to make nothing something. So I'm not saying this is a perfect theory, but if all of this follows from the idea that being is, right, then we're in trouble, right? We're in trouble in terms of thinking about anything but determinately. It seems, yeah. Okay, I'm done.
I have a little I want to throw in. So if it's self-limited, it posits and contains itself. Maybe that's why the sphere is a good thing. That's all I have to say. Done.
No, good. I mean, that's certainly a Hegelian implication that Hegel's going to draw. But Parmenides doesn't. And none of the Greeks do, interestingly enough. So, so one of the inner principles of Parmenidean thought had to wait a long time to be brought to light and reflected on. Sandy.
Oh, I just wanted to say that was helpful, all of that. The pretzel image was helpful to me. It's I guess he doesn't, like I said, he doesn't have that he doesn't just come out and attack the way that modern philosophers do. So it wasn't clear to me, you know, how
Right.
he was actually coming to his conclusions about the problems with this,
Right.
especially because when you went off on your soliloquy, it sounds so beautiful and amazing, and like, why is this not true, you know? Like that's why it's confusing, right? But then when you point out the problems that arise from it, or at least I guess these are the problems that Aristotle is pointing out,
Right.
that arise from thinking this way, it does make a lot of sense, because like you said, contradictions, I guess there's a loss of distinctions as well,
Yes.
because if everything is running into everything, and so this is actually really, really misleading and problematic then.
Right.
Because it's kind of I mean, you can see why people would latch onto it, because on the one hand, it literally seems to explain everything, but on the other hand, it's not very fulfilling.
Yes.
When you start, when other questions arise that are not so easy to explain, I guess. And so that makes
Yes.
sense to me now. And why, and I wasn't in the Parmenides group or whatever. This is the first time I ever heard about Parmenides. So maybe that was the reason why it was hard for me, but I think I get it now. And I think I understand, why he's starting with this, or why he's, making such a big deal out of it, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm just going to add parenthetically, you know, Aristotle wants to be able to say change is. But with the is, we brought in being. And then we've brought in all those considerations that make it impossible for change to be. So change is a contradiction in terms. Okay, Keith, thanks for your patience.
Yeah, my question might stem from the fact that I'm not getting exactly what this term being means.
Yeah.
Because what I don't get is, why can't you say that something like being, which seems to be like something like the God or the one, why can't you say, okay, being is unchangeable, but what is changing is, you know, something else, it's becoming, or it's existence, or what have you. And so that, yeah, why can't you have taken into and say, well, Parmenides, you're right, but we're going to talk about change, and it's going to be involved becoming. Or somehow when you're saying like change is, you're saying that it must be being somehow, and it can't be some sort of actuality versus the potential of being, which doesn't go anywhere.
Oh no, excellent question. I mean, Parmenides is not easy, so don't. So I encourage your questions, and the meaning of what Aristotle is doing will become all the clearer the challenge Parmenides poses itself is. Okay, so in answer to your question, I got a couple of my handy dandy diagrams. Peter, am I able to share? Okay. All right, so I got two in a row that I want to talk about. Okay, so I'm no artist. So I'm starting with this one. I'm gonna start with this one. So when we say that something becomes, right? So start at the left, we got a little leaf, right? This is the becoming of a flower, in case it's not obvious. Right? So something becomes by no longer being what it was, as it were, stepping into the non-being of what it was, right, in order to ultimately become that which it ends up being, right? Now, this whole process, if you think about it along Parmenidean lines, you recognize that this thought is impossible. So we start off with just this idea that something becoming must go through different stages. However you divide that time up, right? So you take your leaf here at the left, and then you stop this process of becoming and look at what it is, right? So from the left, we got one leaf. Then moving to the right, we have two leaves. Now, we say, well, now we see the becoming? The obvious answer is, you don't see anything becoming. You see one thing, and then you see another thing. And they're both at rest. And each is what it is. And then we take a third slice and say, okay, well, let's look at the becoming. What is it? Well, now it's got the more leaves and stuff coming out the center, whatever those things are called. And it just is what it is. It's not becoming. It just is what it is. It's a third thing. And then we get to the flower, and we still don't find the becoming. We just find a being what it is, either a single petal, two petals, multiple petals, or a full-blown flower, right? So at each point, the thing only is what it is and nothing else, and it is not becoming. All right, so now, let me see, I'm gonna share another screen here. I'm gonna stop sharing this. And all right, so I'm not doing the flower. I've got an object on the left, a little smiley face, a object on the right, a little smiley face, right? Now, I should have done a flower, but the flower thing came to me later. So,
Michael,
yeah.
can you put the arrow on the bottom right so that it's bigger for us? Bottom right, bottom right. Resize the window. Yeah. Oh, shoot.
Does everybody see it?
No, now it's all white. Dang it.
That's all I see too. Okay.
It was, you had to resize the window, not hit one of those buttons.
Yeah, you're right. Okay.
Oh, sorry.
This is what it looked like just after the Big Bang.
Sorry, let me just see if I can come up with this. Okay, sorry.
Don't be sorry, it's cool.
Okay.
Quit preview and restart it.
Let me just so I realize this is very tedious.
Okay, perfect. Go. That's great.
It's not tedious. It's full of suspense.
So I'm so embarrassed I have artists in this group. Okay, but okay, whatever. These are logical pictures. These aren't beautiful. All right, so so at any point in what we call a thing's development, the thing only is what it is, and it's not becoming. And so the implication is that the becoming itself belongs to appearance. It's illusion, because the thing only ever is what it is at any given time. All right. So now I'm not going to do flowers. We're just going to do the smiley face. Just represents any object, right? So I'm just trying to make Parmenides' argument as strong as possible. So in order to go from one stage to another, it has to, and that would be on this diagram, going from A to B, right? It must traverse everything that happens in between. Now, we get into the Zeno's paradoxes here now. Right? So if there's two stages, they're separate, and we isolate them, we can always say that there's a stage in between that our object must reach before it reaches stage B, right? And in order for it to reach that, it must reach the halfway point of that interval. And then it's got to reach the halfway point of that interval. And it's got, and the idea is that between any 2 points of its becoming, there's an infinite number of points it has to have traversed in order to get from A to B. Okay. So, so our object, or our flower, going from 1 leaf to 2 leaf, must traverse in a finite amount of time an infinite number of points, and indeed an infinity of infinities, right? Because between any 2 points, there's an infinity of points, and then I take half of that, and between any of those 2 points, there's an infinity of points that it has to traverse, right? So it is impossible for it to ever get started in becoming. It only ever is. That's the Zeno's thought. The thought of something becoming means it must traverse an infinity of infinities to get from one point to the next. But that there's an infinity of points in between those. And there's an infinity of points in between every one of those infinity of points. So it can't become. Becoming is an illusion. The other way to think about the other way that one might solve this problem is to say that from A to B, right, it doesn't go through all those infinity of points. It just stops being. And then at B, some other thing comes to be. So we got our single leaf at point A, that phases out, and then something else with 2 leaves phases in at B, and then that phases out, and then the full blossomed flower phases in at 3. So here we have, that things have to pop out of existence and then pop back into existence. But that means they would have to come from nothing. Okay. So this idea that either the process can never get started, or something has to come from nothing. These both lead us to the conclusion that change is impossible. At any point, it only is what it is, and it's not changing. And no matter how small you make that interval, fraction of a second, it still is what it is, and it's not changing. And then the other thing, and in this diagram, I just wanted to point out, the happy face on the right, is this the same or different? And by what criterion are we judging whether this is the same thing that started off the process, or whether it's come in and out of existence an infinite number of times, and we're just stopping that process briefly to look at the so-called end product. All of this follows from being is. And non-being is not. Right, so
Thank you, Michael. That was wonderful.
I hope it helps, right? So Keith, I was going to bring that stuff anyway, but it seemed like a helpful thing to say about your question.
Yeah.
Can you follow up with me? Can you follow up with me? Thank you.
Yeah. So I get that helps, but I guess I can restate my question then.
Yeah.
Why don't we say that being isn't and non-being is? I'm being serious there, right? Because when I say that being is God, or like we take the example of a seed turning into a tree. Okay, there's some change there. Why don't we say that there is something essential to the whole process that is being, that in a sense isn't, because we are unaware of it, but we know that that all that DNA, all the information is already there to complete the process from the beginning, and that doesn't ever change.
Right. So I mean, we can. I don't know if this addresses your question, but we can change our words, but we only are using our words to understand something, and that something doesn't go away if we change our way of talking about it. So you still want, for instance, you talked about an essence. Well, an essence is, And right, and so we get this whole, and then if you say, well, it's the non-being of essence that controls all becoming, or something like that. Well, then it's literally impossible to make any sense of that, right? What is it about the non-being of essence that can be the cause of anything, right? Aren't we just starting to play with words? So that's my first thought about your proposed solution, and I want you to respond to that. But Bo got in here too. I want to get him. Bo?
It's actually Peter. Go ahead, Peter.
Peter, sorry.
Yeah, I look like Bo these days, apparently. Anyway, I think the way I sort of grapple with Keith's question, and maybe somebody can correct me if I'm taking this too far, but I tend to think in terms of being, in terms of distinction. Is there a distinction or not? Once you draw a distinction, you have more being, as it were. And
Can you exemplify that?
If I distinguish, I go back to Schmidt's example of the Spanish galleon coming around.
Oh, yeah.
So imagine there's the Spaniards back in 1500s or whenever it was, they invade South America. And a Spaniard and a native are sitting there watching the ship come around the cove. They each see physically the same thing. Their eyes will work the same way, blah, blah, blah. They have all the data, as it were. The Spaniard sees a Spanish galleon with captained by so-and-so, Hector, or whomever. The native just sees a thing on the water. He doesn't, that ship doesn't have the same level of being it does for the Spaniard, because the Spaniard can make more and more distinctions. It's a ship. It's not just any old ship. It's a Spanish galleon. Not just any old Spanish galleon. It's one of my fleet. All these determinations, and it's only once. And so being is not a. I think even Ed mentioned this earlier, or alluded to it when he was talking about levels of being. Is being a binary thing or not? It's more of an accretion. It's something that accretes more and more distinctions. Things have more and more being. So pure being is not being able to say anything about anything, roughly.
Right. Yeah. Right. It's the dissolution of all distinctions, right? In a sense, there's no difference between a hot dog and the city of Paris. Right? They just are, right? And any difference is just appearance. All difference melts away. So anyway, Keith, go ahead and follow up. Where are you at this point?
Yeah, I think what Peter said helped, because there's a gradation of being. I hadn't really thought of it that way. Because thinking of like there's being or not being, but I guess there's there's a gradation.
Right.
And if you say it like that, it kind of solves the whole problem. Because you can talk about being in the sense of like the one or something that doesn't change. You can also talk about being in the sense of something that's that's the opposite of that, where there's more gradations.
Right.
I don't know if that's cheating, but it does solve the problem.
Okay, but we don't want to solve this problem too quickly, because we want to stew in it and realize its power, and why Plato and Aristotle spend half their lives grappling with it. Tyler.
Yeah, since Peter brought up distinction, I was going to just throw out, is being distinct from the one, or are we predicating being of the one? Which is, or are we saying they're equivalent, or are we predicating? Which is, if we're predicating, they have to be distinct, in which case we have many.
Right. Well, that was suitably oracular. Do you want to, are you just piggybacking on Peter's comment, or are you making a larger point to this whole Parmenides thing?
I think it relates to Zeno's paradox.
Okay.
Right? Because in the case that we treat, if we treat it as saying being is one, as if we're saying is, we have this sort of the atomistic tautological structure of points.
Yeah. I don't, okay. Yeah. I think I vaguely remember that.
So is, if we're saying is just is, right?
Yeah.
Like with your plant example.
Right.
Then is can't become something else.
Right.
And it's treated as already cut off from anything else it could become.
Right.
But if it's
I see.
if it's a form of predication,
mm-hmm.
You see where I'm going?
Yeah, kinda, but it doesn't hurt to spell it out. Maybe it'll click with somebody else as well.
If it's a form of predication, right, we have the structure of the underlying subject that Aristotle is hinting at, which is that when we say being is one, or one is being even, there's a sense in which it could also be many, or it could be non-being. One could be non-being, or being could be many.
Right.
If it's a form of predication, because then the predicate, right, is just a property of an underlying subject, which could be otherwise.
Yeah. Dude, I'm not quite following. I know that you have a thought here because you always have a good thought, but I can't wrap my arms around it. I'm going to go hit some hands and then hopefully you'll come back. Or do you want to just piggyback on this right now and then try to take another stab at it?
No, we can move along.
No, I want to honor your thought because you're very smart. Anyway, I don't know how I want to do that. But anyway, I know there's a thought there, but I can't totally get my arms around it. So maybe if you can think of a different way to phrase it, that would help me get to where you're going. Garth.
Okay, sorry if this is maybe like a monkey wrench or repeating what other people just said a second ago or something, but it's not just that, like, the in Zeno's paradox you have like a line or a distance reduced to an infinite number of points. If you were to go through this algorithm of dividing the distance up into shorter and shorter distances, you would actually never get to the points. You would always have just infinitely smaller and smaller changes.
Right.
And I think it's worth pointing out that having two motions moving halfway and then moving the other half, if we've assumed that they are equal so as to divide them into two motions, then what is the difference between that one motion of the entire distance and the two shorter motions? There has to be a difference, or else they're the same, but we're obviously thinking of them. So anyway, I don't know. I don't know how to.
No, but I mean, I guess just the counter question is, yeah, but are we just perpetuating the illusion that Parmenides says that we fall prey to every time we think of something changing? Is it just part of the illusion? What you're explicating?
I don't know. I'm a hopeful person. I feel like the more you think about something, the less you will be in the grip of illusion. I don't think that if, like, the universe has like a genie's bottle that's created by an evil demon. So maybe I'm a Cartesian at heart or something.
Right. Okay. I don't have anything to follow up on that. I mean, I guess I just want to ask again, what do you mean that the two halves are the same as the whole, right? Because the whole problem is that you can't even reach the endpoint of that first half, and you can't reach the endpoint of any half.
Yeah, but in order to construct the thought experiment, you had to assume that the two halves are equal to the whole, or you couldn't begin the thought experiment.
Well, yeah.
But then you turn around and say that in some sense they're not equal.
Well, I mean,
in order to think the thought experiment, I don't know.
Yeah, okay, good. But I mean, Descartes doesn't really need to believe in the evil demon to make the thought experiment work. Okay, I'm going to get some more voices in here, but feel free to follow up on that if you want to make me understand it. Sandy.
I appreciate bringing up evil demons, but I don't yet see how it fits in. But I'm excited to get there.
Okay.
I just wanted to say, since we're at 5 o'clock, I was wondering if we were going to be doing any direct reading of the text, and also if we were going to address some of the questions that you posted.
Yeah, eventually.
One of them,
why?
like the one where you said chapter 8, how does Aristotle's definition relate to Parmenides' claim that change is impossible? Is this what we've all just been talking about? Because that question was unclear to me. What exactly you wanted us to answer in that?
Oh, I don't have exact answers. I just want you to work with some of these concepts. And what was my question even?
How does Aristotle's definition relate to Parmenides' claim that change is impossible?
Right. Okay. So obviously, his definition relates to it because he shows that with it that change is possible.
Oh, okay. So that was kind of a trick question. Okay.
No. But it didn't meant to be. Okay. So what's the difference between what Parmenides is saying and Aristotle is saying? Maybe that would have been a clearer way to put it. Right. So, but part of what we're doing here is actually just trying to get a handle on what is Parmenides saying.
Right.
That's what we've been doing for the last hour. So yeah, I promise we'll get to some more text. But as long as this is a fruitful conversation, I don't mind pursuing it a little bit more. But I feel like Parmenides is sinking in the depth and breadth and the enormity of the challenge. Every time you say "is," you're screwed. and that just as an amusing aside, there's a whole school of logicians that said, but you can't say anything like you can't say a book is paper, right? Because a book is one thing and paper is another, right? You can only say book is book and paper is paper, because otherwise we're attributing, we're saying that something has a difference in it from its own being, right? And so there was all these attempts to restructure or reformulate language so that we would only ever say being. And so they would only say tautologies. Tom is Tom, John is John, Socrates is Socrates, dinner is dinner. Right? And so there's a whole school of logic that was doing, in Parmenidean circles, trying to say, well, the only way you can speak truly, the only way to comprehend reality is just, right, to say being, right? John is, Bo is, right? Whatever. And this is absurd too, but it's not the only thing that follows from Parmenides, but it's one of many things that follow from Parmenides. The sophists themselves use Parmenidean theses for their skepticism. So Parmenides had many different tributaries come from his thought. And some of it went to Plato and Aristotle, some of it went to the sophists, some of it went to these other schools. And really, you can look at the unity of Athenian thought as an epochal grappling with Parmenides. Okay, yeah. Okay. Philip.
Here we go. I was thinking about what comes first. An understanding of being or an understanding of identity and difference. And then what comes is that you, in the Parmenidean ascent, you said the final stages of the ascent is thinking as being.
Right.
Being seems the world of identity, and thinking seems the world of difference. Because what thinking does is creates distinction.
Yeah.
Thinking is distinction.
Yeah, but distinctions of being, you can't hold it apart.
Yeah, it's paradoxical to say the least here. Right, it's like the beginning of Hegel, right? From where can we take account?
Right.
And in my final point here, I was thinking about the notion of self. It seems like the notion of self and consciousness is parallel to, that's our modern set of discussions. But the parallel set of arguments is being and change.
Mm.
I mean, Aristotle never talks about the self, or at least not yet. Why is that? And now for us, it's central.
Right.
So we talk about the change. We talk with the term we use talk about the terms we use talk about change and self is consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just speculating these arguments are going to be duplicated, except in the world of self. But it's going to be the same paradoxes.
I read somewhere that some people think that the Greeks were zombies and therefore had no inner access to their inner states. And so that's why they didn't talk about selves. But I think this is a very dubious theory.
Yes. I don't think anyway, okay. It's not, but I think about identity and difference and the relation between self and being, and therefore kind of the radicalism of Heidegger.
Oh, yeah.
Where we're going to throw out self and we're going back to being.
Yeah. You know, okay, just really shortly. I mean, you know my line. Questions of self are treated in Greek thought under the term intellect or nous, which makes it so interesting to me. Right, but they don't. Yeah. So anyway, they did it, but not the way they didn't individualize the self the way we do, and then get into all the subjectivity problems. Right. Yeah. Ed.
Well, when you start with the self, you've already taken for granted,
right,
the identity difference conversation.
Oh, totally. Yes.
You've already individuated.
Yes.
So, okay, that's all.
No, that's good. That's good. I like that because it hypothesizes, sameness is always different than difference, and so each individual subject is different from every other subject. And then we get into the question, I know people who like to refer to our shared world, right? Under those conditions, there's no such thing as a shared world. I mean, it's impossible to even create something shared, right? So that and to the extent to which we communicate and somehow share things, that categorical understanding of sameness and difference as being absolute opposites fails. So and that's what Plato recognized, is that they're not opposites; they mutually involve one another.
So this conflict appears our current language. Truth is my lived experience.
Oh, fucking hell, yeah.
Well, is it identity or difference? Is it logos or being? I mean, it's okay. But anyway, it's like, okay, see, these are old.
Yeah, I appreciate Garth's comment. You have to understand the history of these thoughts, because we always start in media res. We just pick them up, right? And then we pick them up in whatever current meanings dominate our culture. And then we assume that, we can just start thinking from there and cut yourself off from the past and just what everybody says or the people you like, Stephen Hawking's, whoever, just parrot that stuff and you're golden. So, okay, but I'm not going to get too polemical here. Ed.
I guess just one little short comment first, and that is, it would seem hard to believe that the Greeks operated like zombies when you read, Sappho or Archilochos.
Yeah.
That they seem to have an interior experience. But the lyric poets also seem to argue for an individualized self, because Archilochos is not saying I'm you and you're me. He's saying I'm going to screw you over. I'm going to, it's like rap battles or something, So, but then just coming back, kind of one of the questions that seems to be floating around is, why is Plato coming back to Parmenides? Why is Aristotle coming back to Parmenides? And it seems like the big, the way I see it is he blew their minds, basically. He blew their minds. And long story short, he blew their minds because he said, look, it's pretty simple. being has to be, or it isn't being. And if it isn't being, then there's nothing to talk about or think about. And it looks like that means, if you just follow the logic, it looks like we can't have change, we can't have multiplicity, we can't have difference. And well, we're just screwed because we're trapped in the logic. If you follow the logic, you have to go this way.
Right.
And if it looks otherwise, then that's your problem. You're just being illogical.
Exactly. Perfect. That's awesome. And that's we might be able to put a wrap on Parmenides here briefly on that, because that was so good. But I'm just going to double check. Does anybody want to get a word in edgewise before we dare another sentence or two? Okay, so
Michael, maybe there is one more wrap I want.
Yeah.
And then, so if you really accept the Parmenides, is there knowledge? Can there even be philosophy? Don't we all just basically have to go home and say it's all one? There's no change. There's nothing to talk about.
There isn't even thinking.
Yeah.
There isn't even thinking or an argument, right? Argument has to start with a premise and finish with a conclusion. Change is part of thinking and arguments.
You know,
Thinking, and there's no philosophy, right? There's nothing to talk about. Let's just go home and get stoned. It's over.
Well,
Right.
we're already stoned and we just don't know it.
Yeah. I mean, I do want to just remind everybody that Parmenides is not only the one who really began, I think, the Western logical, myth-critical tradition with this thought of being, and but he's also the one who said being and thinking are the same. So, right, and so I'm only going to say that. I mean, our whole thing is thinking the unity of being and thought, and Parmenides is the one who gave us that sentence that Plato and Aristotle wrestled with and found plenty of instances where that's the case, but other instances where it's not the case. Well, I'm only saying that just to remind people he didn't. Maybe it follows that thought is impossible, or maybe it follows that thought is different than one takes it to be prima facie.
Whoa.
So,
Thank you.
Yeah. I think, but we should always keep that in mind. You know, if being is what he says it is, how can that also be nothing other than thought? Because being and thought are the same.
So then
we start to understand. Okay, thought is unlimited. There's nothing you can't think about. All thoughts are internal to one another, and so you get this sheer inner intensive infinity that is very similar, at least, to the way he talked about being. But okay, and like I said, that's what the Greeks are going to use the term nous, or intellect, to talk about. Go ahead, Sandy.
Just to respond to that, what people were saying about this overemphasis, I guess, on being or there being no change. Yeah, I mean, I kind of got that impression as well, that it really lends itself to this kind of woo-woo kind of thinking. This kind of new agey sort of thing, which is actually really popular now. So, it's but I was just curious why you said it was myth critical. I mean, you can message me separately on that. We don't have to go down that road. I'm just curious about it. Or you can bring it up tomorrow at Gerard.
Oh, okay, yeah. No, I mean, it just be, yeah.
And then the other thing was, you said something else. I'm blanking out now, but you said something else after that it was myth critical, and then something else, but I forgot. But I was just curious. I mean, it seems to be a very ambiguous kind of idea that he's putting forth. On the one hand, it opens up opportunities. On the other hand, it seems to be very reductionist. And so I think this is another reason why it's hard to get your head around it.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just going to agree with you on that. I was thinking, later thinkers often accused Parmenides of being a materialist, and it's hard for me to get my head around that, right? But that just shows that the concept of matter itself has a specific history and the way in which it played into later discourses, which is very, very interesting to pursue.
I remember now. It was when you said that this idea of like conflating being and thinking is that kind of like similar to what Descartes says? And
I
don't know. Yeah, go ahead.
He says being intellect and to be or being is the same. And so are you thinking about Descartes' famous line, I think therefore I am?
Yeah. Or is that is there more something subtle? Well, I was just wondering. Okay. And I'm just curious. So Aristotle, I mean, and then also what I gathered from everything people said, that thinking is for Aristotle going to be something much more complex, I guess, than what it is for Parmenides. It's going to be something more a lot. There's just more. It has more being, ironically. I guess for him.
That's true. That is going to be a result of this. But yeah, so you're totally on the right path. I appreciate that. All right, so we don't have time to reread 1.7, but I'm sure everybody's done it several times because I know you have tons of leisure. Right. So, but since I did ask the questions, and I'm presuming you at least thought a moment or two about them, right? Now, given this whole Parmenides discussion we've had, very fruitful, by the way, I really appreciate it. Does anybody want to take a stab at this first question? How does Aristotle's definition relate to Parmenides' claim that change is impossible, right? How does Aristotle engage Parmenides to show that change is indeed possible? Peter.
Sorry, every time I share, the controls all get messed up anyway. The thing I got from Aristotle's thing was he comes up with the 3 starting points: the contraries, right, and then the underlying subject.
Right.
And Parmenides is stuck in just the contraries, being and not being.
Exactly right.
Being and nothing.
Being and nothing.
And that's, I think Aristotle thinks the clue is, well, if you have this underlying subject, that's going to get us out of Parmenides' problem.
Yes, I agree. Anybody else have a take on this question? I mean, just because I agree doesn't mean there's not a lot more to be said. So, Phil, if you think about it slightly differently, please get it out there so that we can discuss it as a group. I can't bear long silence.
Can I just ask something? Sorry, yeah. Was somebody talking?
No, I was just saying I can't bear long silences, so I was going to start filling up the place with more words.
So when Aristotle is saying here, for there must be some underlying subject for it to come from. So when he's talking about this underlying subject, he's bringing to us an idea that it can't, he's kind of saying this underlying subject is, I guess, the counterpart to what Parmenides was saying was nothing. Is right. That kind of what he's doing? And his emphasis then on this underlying subject, or he's introducing like a new idea, because he's saying it's not nothing, but at the same time it's distinct from the first thing, but it's still part of it, right?
Right.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that
right.
that made that I was following.
that hooks up with what Peter says, if you remember, Aristotle begins by giving us some linguistic examples of common ways of referring to things changing, and he said, well, there's the simple way and the compound way of referring to that. Like the human becomes musical, or the unmusical becomes musical, and the unmusical human becomes the musical human, right? And so the musical becomes unmusical. That's, so to speak, the Parmenidean example of something ceasing to be what it is, and then something else coming into being. And since they're contraries, the one must replace the other because they have nothing in common. Musical and unmusical have nothing in common. So the one disappears and the other comes into being. And so we have what he calls simple. Some people translate that as unconditional, and some people translate it as absolute change, right? That's this whole idea of popping in and popping out of existence that we keep employing. As we employ that as always an example as, if that's what your explanation amounts to, you failed to explain anything, right? You have failed to explain change if all you can say is things pop in, things pop out of existence. Right. So
was that something that people said before Aristotle then, in addition to what Parmenides said?
Well, I mean, there are many people who are at least convinced of the Parmenidean thesis and denied the reality of change, and then started to, like I said, started to try to reform the Greek language so that if you wanted to speak true, you would only speak in either is, and that's the only word you'd ever say, or right. or the tautologies, right? So that's just one example of a culture being, so to speak, infected by a really stupid idea and then running with it. So,
I could see a modern version of that taken
oh my God,
on social media.
Yes, yes. Beware the Neo-Parmenideans. Okay, yeah, but whatever. Right, and so Aristotle does get to the point where he also talks about like simple becoming, like the statue comes to be, right? That's another example of something just seeming to come out of nothing, at least if you look at it linguistically, right? Statue comes to be, the human being comes to be. Right? These are also linguistic sentences that imply that being comes from nothing. Change just happens. Things pop in.
So there's no art then.
Right.
There can't be any room for art in something like this.
Exactly.
Because it's just a statue, in the same way that like a tree is a tree.
Right.
And it's like, yeah, but it's not, because like one is from nature, the other is man-made. That's already like too far for them. You've crossed into the forbidden territory if you start talking like that.
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
So let's just talk about that first question just briefly more, and then we'll get to the second question about it, because the doctor stuff is really, I think, illuminating, and we should really get to it. So Peter correctly said that the difference between a Parmenidean account of change and the Aristotelian account of change is that the Parmenidean is only takes into account the change of one contrary to another. Since they share nothing in common, there cannot be a transition, right? But rather the one must disappear and the other must pop into existence. So unmusical to musical, right? Right, where was I going with that? So, and then Peter correctly said, okay, so he's bringing in, so he's keeping the contrary as this change does imply moving from one contrary to another, and change implies more than that, right? It implies that something comes to be something, right? And that's this hypokaimenon, this the underlying subject. And it's the underlying subject that allows us, the principle of the underlying subject allows us to think the contraries as not popping in and out of existence, but one replacing the other as as something comes to be something. It's very abstract and it's very simple. I think this is absolutely brilliant, but it's not brilliant because the thought is so deep, but just the way in which he's engaging with Parmenides. Last thing I wanted to say is, this underlying subject. This underlying subject, he says, it refers in two different ways. I don't remember the exact text, but he says, on the one hand, it's the underlying subject is that which remains the same through the change, and the other hand, it's the lack that's replaced by some positive quality or quantity or something like that. So this gives us a clue that I think is very important, and we should really learn it, that the term lack or the term matter, these principles of change, they're not concepts of things. There's not a thing called lack that an object has and then loses, right, when it becomes musical. There's not this matter, the way we like to talk about matter, right? There's not this thing, matter, that underlies everything and is somehow the basis for anything becoming something else. So these starting points are starting points of thought. And with the thought of, for instance, matter, what we're given here by Aristotle is, if you want to think of something as undergoing change, it is not enough to find the contraries. You must find the underlying matter, that which is becoming something. But all the different things that change, they don't have the same underlying matter. Right. So the marble that is the matter of the statue is not the same as the DNA that is the matter of the sperm and egg. So these are like guiding principles. It's actually what Kant will later call concepts of reflection. So it's very, very exciting, but nobody probably knows what those are, so I'm not going to talk about it. But the idea is that with these concepts, we have principles according to which we can understand something as changing when we can identify both what changes and what the underlying subject is. If we have all of that at our disposal, we can think of it as changing. But if we do not have these principles of these thoughts that thought uses to guide itself in its investigations, if we do not have all of these principles together, whatever we're talking about will not be an instance of change, even if we use the word change. So matter's not a thing.
Or you could equally say that when you speak about change without those specifications, then you will simply contradict yourself.
Right, you'll end up in a Parmenidean ditch. You'll be talking about illusions, pretending they're real. This, by the way, happens frequently in natural science, but that's another topic.
Well, I mean, when Aristotle gives the example of letters being a matter.
Yes, thank you.
Those aren't physical things.
Exactly. Perfect. So there is no. So I think this is really important, right? Because a normal nominalist position would want to say, well, we get the concept of matter by perceiving the underlying subject or perceiving that things are made out of things, right? And then we draw this one concept out and call it the matter. And now with this concept, now we can talk about the matter of everything, right? And so, but that's not how this thought works. There is no one thing that is designated by the term matter. And this is important for like finding the material cause. We're going to get to the causes again, right? But with matter and with contraries, it's not that every changing thing is going to have is going to have some specific contraries, but rather look for the contraries, look for the matter, and if you can identify them as belonging together in this specific way that our concept of change has yielded, then you are talking about something changing rather than being in the dark about it. Does it change? Well, people say it changes, but just because people say it changes doesn't mean it's changing. We need the concept. We need to hold together the minimal conditions for using the term change at all. If we lose those minimal conditions, we will be addressing it as mere going from contrary to contrary, and we will fall into the Parmenidean ditch. We will not be talking about anything. We will just be prey to deception. Sandy.
It's unclear to me, like, what matter is. That matter like a concept, or is it matter like the physical matter, like in the scientific? Okay, so what's the German word or the Greek word? Help me out.
Hule. German, I think, says Stoff.
Stoff. Okay, and then that's like, I'm just confused because like the way I've been introduced with this word before, it was always like in a sciencey.
Right.
So it's like matter, like something matters, like this matters, like that.
Not quite like that. Just well. Does anybody want to try? I'm afraid I might just end up repeating myself, and then I won't be helping Sandy out. Does anybody want to? Who thinks they understand what I'm talking about? Take a stab at it, and maybe with your own words, it will be illuminating. Otherwise, I'm happy to do it again. But so, matter and the contraries, and here we have the lack and the end point of becoming. We understand something as changing when we can identify in that something what the endpoint is, what it must have lacked in order to become what it became. Right? In order to become musical, it must have not been musical. Otherwise, it couldn't have become musical. Right? And that's very simple. And that's not meant to be deep. That's very, and Aristotle's not meant to be deep here either. Right? In order for something to become musical, it must have been unmusical. And that's one of the principles, right? Without that not being musical, it could not have become musical. So we need to identify this lack. When we identify this lack, we also identify, and we're going to get to this, a capacity, a potency. Okay, but I got sidetracked there. So when we have lack, end state, and the underlying subject together in this particular constellation, this particular configuration, right? When we examine something and ask, is it changing? We can only say yes if it exhibits these three, it exhibits something that plays the role of these three principles. So the principles help us seek out in the world those instances of real change that doesn't fall prey to the Parmenidean critique. Sandy, I'm going to check in. So these concepts are not concepts of things. They are methodological concepts, concepts of method. If you want to find change and you want to find real change, then you must employ these criteria in this particular configuration. And if you can find behavior of if you can find behavior of things that would be an instance of these principles, then you can be sure you're talking about change and not nothing, not an illusion.
The principles meaning matter and lack?
Yes, exactly. Matter,
Okay.
lack, and end state, or end state.
Okay. All right. I'm just sorry if I just
No,
maybe
this
it's the
is
heat.
difficult.
Like
No. I want to say, and I want to say this is a difficult thought, and that's why I want to belabor the point, right? That these concepts are not concepts that refer to things. They refer to what you must look for in the in what configuration in order to be certain that you're dealing with something changing rather than any alternative. So there are concepts for thought. So thought takes its bearings on these principles, because thought, in knowing these principles, knows what anything must be to qualify as changing. Okay, Ed, you've had a hand up for a while.
Just maybe a clarifier, because just to make sure, and again, maybe I'm misinterpreting what you're saying, but it sounds like it could be confusing what you're saying if it weren't clear that there are three words that you're kind of using almost interchangeably in this context, even though you could distinguish them in a different context. You're hopping between potency, matter, and subject. And
right.
So when we talk about three principles, one of those three principles can be got at by either of those three words in this context, just to keep the number three clear, right? In the sentences that you've said, the place,
yes,
the place that's being filled, of the three things, one of those three things is being referred to by three different names,
right?
Matter, potency, and subject.
Well, I don't want to be identifying matter and potency. And if I did, that's just a mistake, because Aristotle points out in chapter 9 that they're not the same. So if I made that mistake, then that's non-Aristotelian.
Right.
But you're exactly right. I'm using different words to designate the same thought, right? So matter is not a thing. You can't go out and find matter any more than you can go out and find lacks.
Right. I'm just saying, in the context of discussing change, you can kind of use them interchangeably. But, like the example that I threw up earlier, I realized afterwards it doesn't really work, because if you're talking about the letters that make up a word, you can't really talk about change there, because, the letters are always going to be the part of that word if you're talking about that word, but, if you're talking about change, then these three things point in the same direction, point at the same principle.
But you're absolutely right to say that Aristotle gives that as an example of matter too, right? And there's nothing in common in terms of like physical characteristics between the matter of letters and the matter of a statue or the matter of a human being, right? Whatever fills up. So I don't know if the term, right? These concepts are concepts of roles that things play, and when those roles interlock in the way in which these principles indicate, we have our guarantee that we're talking about something that is changing. And Peter, I see, has underlined an absolutely wonderful sentence. So maybe somebody could read that paragraph with the multiple color highlighting. Make sure we don't miss it. Right.
I can read.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you.
As for the underlying nature, it is scientifically knowable by analogy. For as the bronze stands to the statue, the wood to the bed, or as what lacks a shape stands to anything else that has a shape. So the underlying nature stands to a substance, a this something and a being. So he's really driving home the relationship here between the underlying and being.
Mm. So bronze and wood have nothing material in, or nothing, how do you know, nothing, they don't have the same molecular structure, it's not the same atoms that make them up or whatever, right? But they're still the matter of these specific things. And so what makes them both matter is not their physical composition, but the role they play in the nature of that thing. So when I say role, I'm talking about so we now, when we want to talk about change, we use these three principles and we use them to find those aspects of things that are playing the role indicated by our principles. What is the underlying subject? What is the end state? What is what must it lack in order to gain this end state? So these concepts guide us to look at those constituents of things that are playing the relevant roles. And if there is nothing playing one or more of these roles, then we have no basis for saying that it's something that changes.
Okay, so he's kind of he's championing a little bit here this idea of looking at two different things that first appear to not have anything in common, but in a certain context,
right,
are actually related and
yes,
functioning in a similar way.
Yes, that's the other important word. That's the word I haven't brought up, but yes, they're functioning in the same way. Their sameness is in their function and not in their physical composition or anything like that. Yeah, so for the underlying nature, right, it is scientifically knowable by analogy. We do not know it through perception. We do not know it, well, I mean, any other way. We know it analogically. So what the bronze does for the statue, the wood does for the bed, and the DNA does for the human being. And that's the underlying nature.
This is where it gets interesting to me with Aristotle, because it seems like when he talks about something like this, that he's just pointing something out that's really uncontroversial, like something that, like, it doesn't take a whole bunch of, we don't really have to like actively learn something, but I mean, maybe we do. I don't know. Maybe we can see it because Aristotle, and thank God, and otherwise we would, like, I don't know, be living under a rock and be complete idiots. I don't really know. I'm curious though, but it seems like there's something about the human mind that is naturally complex and can make these kind of distinctions, right? So that's what I find kind of fascinating about it, because it's like you did all this work to come to this conclusion, which seems kind of banal.
Yes. He's not trying to make stupendous discoveries. He wants to say, you know what? You already have in your possession the tools for the right answer. And so the right answer is always going to be banal, but you didn't understand that those two tools already belong to you, right? So yeah, that's and this is for me how I think about Aristotle's, appropriation of Platonic anamnesis, right? The memory or recollection of a former life, right? That's the mythological formulation of the same idea. You already have in you you already have at your disposal the tools to solve these things, but you haven't recognized them as the tools yet. So we need to make them explicit. Peter.
Perhaps I'm overemphasizing this scientifically knowable here.
Yeah.
But that always reminds me, again, this is again maybe over applying posterior analytics one too many times. But in the posterior, I mean, scientifically knowable was usually through a syllogism, right? You have your premises and blah, blah, and that's how you got to scientific knowledge, except for the base cases, which were known via epigage, aka induction, if you want to
Right.
caveat on what induction really means.
Right.
But is analogy something, so this is something I'm really not sure, is analogy something a third way here? I'm not sure exactly. It doesn't seem to be syllogistic. It doesn't seem to be inductive.
Interesting. I don't know. I actually don't know how to answer that. I don't know. Tom or anybody, do you have a take on that? Any Aristotelians have a take on that? So I mean, I think the only stuff that occurs to me won't be very helpful. So I don't think this is a method, though. I mean, that's the first caveat I'd introduce here. Right? This isn't a method, but we know something analogically, in terms of the role that something has to play in order to count as an underlying subject, or the role it has to play in order to count as overcoming a lack or something like that. Yeah, and the other thing is that the analytics are all about argument and understanding different terms through the middle term and all the rest of it, and so that maybe metaphysical, maybe this is a use of scientifically knowable that's independent of syllogistic form.
Who was it that gave the definition of analogy like last time?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think that guy showed up. Yeah. I have to listen to the recording to remember what he had to say about that. That was good. But I mean, if we see that two things are like each other in the same way that two other things are like each other, we're not knowing the things, we're knowing the relation. And the relation is different than the things. And so here, when we think something as changing, we're thinking about a certain relation between the principles, and the principles are there to guarantee that what we talk about is change and not spontaneous coming to be and passing away, not the Parmenidean replacement of contraries.
Yeah, I think analogy means like similar form. Because when I learned to solve analogy problems for the SAT, what you're supposed to do is use the words in a sentence. If you can replace both words with the other pair of words in the same sentence, then you've got the analogy, and those are the analogy cases.
Peter?
Yeah, I just noticed, of course, I'm reading Reeves' footnote 119, wherein he quotes Aristotle from the Metaphysics. And here's the quote, the first couple sentences of the quote from the Metaphysics. What we wish to say is clear from the particular cases by induction. That goes back to posterior analytics. And we must not look for a definition of everything, but be able to comprehend the analogy, namely that as what is building is in relation to what is capable of building, and what is awake is in relation to what is asleep, what is seeing is in relation to what has its eyes closed but has sight. It goes on a few more of those. Anyway, so of the differences exemplified in this analogy, let the activity be marked off by the first part, the potentiality, by the second. Well, I don't know. I don't know if that helps at all. But at least it relates. We have analogy and induction in one quote from Aristotle, and that was the only other aspect of scientific knowledge was either syllogistic or then how did you get the base cases. So at least that relates, but I still don't comprehend it yet.
Anything in metaphysics past about book theta is so difficult to understand that you've got to read like a whole book for each chapter.
Well, okay, I don't have a satisfying answer to Peter, so I'm not going to just make something up. But if we're at least, if we made some progress on the whole idea of functional concepts, because that's what's going on here, right? They designate roles that things or parts of things or many things can play together that would constitute the underlying subject, or the form, which is the end state, or the lack, right? Right. And so in all the different cases of change, what these terms will refer to will be different. So the matter in one case is wood, and the other case it's DNA. And it's not because these things are reducible to atomic structure or something like that, but it's just the role that they're playing in the process of change that we are inquiring into. If we can find all these things, we have reason to say yes, this is change. If we cannot, then we will be perplexed, and we won't know whether it's change or something else.
Peter gave us a warning. Are the thing, its contrary, and the underlying subject.
Yeah.
I hate saying the word thing there, but I couldn't think of a good word.
Yeah, unfortunately, Aristotle uses sometimes morphe, which is often translated as shape, and but then he will say that that musical is the shape, and so obviously we're not talking about like a geometrical shape or anything like that. And so it's whenever you see shape, unless it's specifically like a geometrical example, or he's talking about something geometrical, then you should really always think form, like Platonic form.
Oh, is that why Hegel uses shape too?
Ooh. Yeah, yeah, maybe. At least we can understand where he would have got the synonymy. All right, it's almost 6. Are people going to bail? We never got to the doctor. All right, let's just use whatever time we have left and read the paragraph about the doctor. Actually, it's 2 paragraphs. Maybe we just launch into the conversation a little bit and then continue it next time. 0-minute warning. Okay, but anybody who needs to leave can leave without feeling like they're being rude. Okay, so I apologize. We really should do this seminar for 4 hours. I think it's the only way to make any progress.
I don't know. I maybe after this, if I go back and read the doctor section, even on my own, maybe it'll make more sense than when I was reading it before.
Yeah, but let's see. Let's just read a little. So they embraced, right? The Parmenideans. They embraced this belief then because of the foregoing considerations. We, on the other hand, say that the claim that something comes to be from what is or from what is not, or that what is or what is not affects something, or is affected, or comes to be a this, of whatever sort, is in one way no different from the claim that the doctor affects something, or is affected, or is, or comes to be something from being a doctor. So, since we say this latter thing in 2 ways, it is clear that we also say from what is, and what is affects or affected in 2 ways. Yikes. Okay, let's get to the doctor and then try to make some rudimentary sense of this. If you wouldn't mind scrolling down just a wee bit. Thanks. Now, a doctor builds a house not insofar as he's a doctor, but insofar as he's a builder, and comes to be pale not insofar as he's a doctor, but insofar as he's dark. But he cures and comes to be ignorant of medicine insofar as he's a doctor. So since we in the strictest sense say that a doctor acts on something, is affected by something, or comes to be something from being a doctor, when it is insofar as he is a doctor that he acts on it, is affected by it, or comes to be it. It is clear that to say that something comes to be from what is not also signifies this, namely, coming to be from it, insofar it is what is not. Ah, dear Aristotle. I'll be right back.
I guess it's open mic. I just take that insofar as he's the doctor is obviously the underlying subject here. And
Yeah, that was my interpretation too. And I'm thinking, when we think of curing a disease, then if it's a doctor that's curing the disease, then it's a different kind of change than if magical herb is curing the disease or prayer is curing the disease, right? Because the underlying substance would be different.
Is medicine the matter then? Is that what?
I guess if you're assuming that he's using medicine to cure the disease, as opposed to like.
I mean, is that kind of like what makes the doctor is medicine? Like that's what.
I think matter is relatively unimportant for Aristotle.
Okay. Well, why did we talk about it then?
Well, matter's very well. I mean, matter. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Well, matter as physical stuff versus the matter, the dizaka, that's different.
Ah.
It seems like the medicine and the doctor, there's a relationship there that's kind of necessary, because I mean, otherwise a person can dress up in, a coat and say they're a doctor, right? When they're not, when they're actually just a scammer.
Right.
So.
Well, I mean, the first thing to notice. Go ahead.
Maybe the underlying substance is the person that is sick, not the doctor, in this passage.
Let's not try to find the analogies too quickly. Let's just find out what's going on with this doctor, right? And maybe we can figure out why he's even bringing it up here.
Well, I think when Sandy is saying matter, maybe she's thinking of underlying substance because of the things that I was thinking she's bringing up.
Right, but the matter is the underlying substance.
Okay. That. All right. Wait, substance or subject, or is it the same thing?
I mean, just think about the bronze statue. The bronze doesn't stop being bronze when it becomes a statue.
Right.
And so it remains bronze even if it takes on a new form, right? Before it was a lump of bronze, and then it's mercury, or Hermes.
So this is kind of
it doesn't stop being bronze,
right?
What's that?
This is about capacity, pretty much.
Yes.
So,
yes,
doctor has the capacity to play the role of doctor even when he is not actively acting out that capacity.
Mm-hmm.
But he first gives the example of the doctor building something.
Right.
So there's this idea
He's
that
not
the doctor
acting.
Yeah. Go ahead.
He's not acting in his capacity as a doctor when he's building, but he's still a doctor insofar as he has the capacity to play the role of a doctor still.
So remember Aristotle pointed out earlier on this idea that something can be one in number. So like Sandy's just one human being, right? But she can have many, what does he call it?
They can wear many hats.
Modes of being, right? Many modes of beings, right? So a human being is one in number, but being a doctor is different than being a builder. And yet the same person can cure and build. So these are two different modes of being of one substance that is one in number, something, yeah, one in number. So it's in terms of accountable, it's just one thing, but it can realize different capacities, right? And so it's so right. Curing is the realization of one's capacity to be a doctor, and building a house is the realization of one's capacity of building. But these two capacities are not the same, because it's not the capacity of curing that I employ when I build a house, and vice versa, right? So we're looking at one countable thing, multiple modes of being. That's I think the first thing that we need to keep in mind here. So things change, right? The doctor cures through the realization of a capacity. And that capacity is unrealized until the doctor uses it, but the doctor has a capacity that somebody else who's not a doctor doesn't have. And so that other person can't cure. I'm hesitating because you can accidentally cure somebody, but unless you have actually medical knowledge, you're doing it not from knowledge, but only accidentally. Not insofar as you're a doctor, but insofar as you got lucky. So I mean, one of the reasons why I wanted to focus on this doctor thing is just to hammer in this whole idea that things that are one in number have multiple modes of being depending on their capacities and what can be realized. So here we have being and being beginning to be linked together with potency and and actualization. We're not thinking about being as some inert, I don't know what you say, some positive, existing, inert, static blah that I stumble over or it gets in my way, right? I think that's how, like Peirce or something defines existence as anything that resists our efforts or something like that. No, this is, so being is somehow actualizing, right? And so we're getting towards those concepts. That's why I wanted to start talking about this paragraph, because we can begin to see how this notion of being is being cashed out in terms of potency and actualization of a potency. But what we're trying to do here is, in addition to starting to get a handle on Aristotle's notion of being, which is very different than Parmenides, we also want to see how he uses this to help us understand becoming.
Yeah, that was earlier what I was trying to get at with the being not being like a point if it's going to be a form of predication or an external thing.
Right. Oh, okay. Had a little light bulb when you said external thing. To be honest, I'm still not quite at what you're after, getting what you're after with predication. But
well,
okay.
Predication involves two things being in a relation that cannot be an external relation. So we can't treat being and one as external points if we're going to treat them,
okay, yeah.
Or if we're going to treat being as a form of predication or one as a form of predication.
Well, I mean, you can predicate Pale of Socrates, and there's no inner relation there. I guess maybe that's why I wasn't following, because predication isn't always a predication of a necessary relation.
Well, I think, and not necessary interrelation, but it does bring them into something that cannot be a purely external relation, right?
Yeah, okay.
So even if Socrates is white, that doesn't mean that white is utterly independent of Socrates in the way that external matter is sort of thought.
Okay, I follow now. Thanks. Yeah, so that externality, internality thing is probably over most everybody's heads. So you're going to have to do a little bit more spade work to introduce people to this thought, so that that they can benefit from your reflection on it. So just as a recommendation, because it's very important. I think it's illuminating, but you got to bring people up to speed. But not now, because it's already after 6. So maybe next time. All right. Let's pick this up at this paragraph and talk about the doctor, and then talk about in paragraph in chapter 9 how he distinguishes matter and lack. Okay, and then we'll be done with this chapter. I'm hoping. Okay, today we really went into Parmenides, and that was good. And I think people are really kind of getting it and getting at the level that Aristotle is trying to do a solution. All right, he's dealing with something very deep and complex, and it's also very it's embedded in our language and our natural ways of thinking. You know, being is, duh, right? And also, you know, if I'm going to move, I've got to go from here to there. But in order to get from here to there, I've got to get halfway there, and then I got to get halfway there, and then I got to get halfway there, right? So, so these paradoxes and this understanding of being is very available at the most superficial level of our language, not just the Greek language. So there's a lot of so you have to dig deep in order to deal with this particular problem. But digging deep doesn't mean we get at something astonishing and unheard of, and nobody's ever heard of it, right? Just as Sandy was saying, there's something banal about the solution, but that's something banal is going to be the solution to such a massive problem is itself A, very Aristotelian. He's very sober that way, and B, you know, very suggestive of how solutions are not necessarily so distant that we're incapable of them. Like Garth said, you know, thinking hard is usually the best way to deal with these, to get there. All right. Those are my concluding remarks for the evening. We'll do the doctor, we'll do this. Oh, right, so yeah, so before everybody leaves, I'm hoping that we can get through this. So we're not going to discuss Parmenides and all the breadth and depth. So I really hope that we can at least, I'm just going to assign it now, at least read and get familiar with the first 3 books, of those 3 chapters of book 3. And that's where he's going to reformulate his whole theory of change. Some scholars think that it's a later and more mature understanding of change, and he's going to do it explicitly in the concepts of potentiality and actuality. So here we're getting at least a layer deeper into his conception of change, and we're going to see how these 2 concepts function, what their function is, what they get at, and that's going to help us when we return to the metaphysics, to when he starts talking about them there. Yeah, dunamis and anagaia, right? Exactly right, Garth. All right, so last time I just left, not realizing there was going to be an after party.
So we stop recording now?
Oh yeah, go ahead and stop recording.
And we can do the after party.
Okay.